Good morning. Good morning, Senator. I know that we wanted to give an update on what's going on in Syria, particularly what's going on in northern Syria with the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces and what's going on with the de facto Syrian government right now. There's a lot that's been happening, prison breaks through some of the chaos that's happening that are holding Daesh or ISIS or ISIL, however you would like to refer to them as. So I want to pass it to you, Senator, so you can give us an update on that.
Well, I commented on an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and it dealt with the fact that all of what's happening to the Kurds in Syria, the central government led by this fellow, he calls himself al-Shara now. He was Mohammed al-Julani, a terrorist wanted with a bounty on his head for $10 million by the United States. He's now the president of Syria. So Al-Qaeda, the group that attacked the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on 9/11, is in control of Syria. And they have used their power. They're a very vicious, very bloodthirsty group. And they've used their power to attack all of the minorities in Syria. They went after the Alawites. They butchered about 1,500 of them. They kidnapped 500 women to sell them as sex slaves. They then attacked the Druze over closer to the Israeli side, and they killed about 1,200 in the initial attack. Also kidnapped women once again. They used women as like you would trade in horses or cattle or something, and it's part of their religious beliefs. And then they subsequently had another attack on the Druze, slaughtered some more. Then they turned their attention to the Kurds, and they had been negotiating with the Kurds and finally decided they're through with that. And they amassed a tremendous armored force, attacked, and they have just been rolling over the Kurds. Now, the article in the Wall Street Journal spoke about what was going on, and so I responded because you know, ever since the administration, and I'm a Trump supporter, but I really, really dislike what's going on with our policy on Syria, and not too fond of our entire foreign policy. But I was quite amazed that President Trump allowed himself to be photographed in the White House shaking hands with this bearded jihadi. And anyway, my comment to the Wall Street Journal, I said, al-Shara, or Mohammed al-Julani, as he was always known, founded Al-Qaeda in Syria. He waged a bloodthirsty campaign of mass rapes and thousands of beheadings. Kurds hoped to stand on the side throughout the war, and they did so tactfully. But by declining to serve as part of President Assad's forces, they weakened Syria, causing it to fall to terrorists of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Now, the U.S. has lost interest in the grand plan to create a Kurdish homeland. We've kicked them to the curb, and thousands will be slaughtered. I warned their leaders years ago that the U.S. would leave one day and that they would face hostile nations on all three sides. Now that day has come. Syria was once free. Now it is submerging in a sea of blood. Credit the CIA, MI6, Mossad, and Turkish intelligence, MIT. So that was my simple summary of what was going on. For some of our listeners who are relatively new to the foreign policy arena, I've just mentioned that if you go back maybe 7 years ago, um, there was an intense push in all of the mainstream media for this idea that the Kurds deserved a homeland.
Mm-hmm.
The Kurds, there's something about the Kurds. They deserve to have a land of their own. Now, no one pointed out at the time, that not in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, nobody pointed out that the Kurds are a minority in northern Syria. They just, well, they got to have a homeland. They don't have a homeland. How can you not have a homeland? Well, there are zillions of people who don't have homelands. There are all kinds of minorities. The Vietnamese who came and settled in the United States, they don't have a homeland. They just became Americans. I mean, this is the way the world is. But when in foreign policy, the public doesn't know much of anything except the article that they're reading at the moment. And if you focus their attention on one thing, they will tend to believe it. Mm-hmm. And people did believe it. What happened is there's a great battle in Kobani between the Kurds and ISIS. Now, the Kurds avoided fighting for their own country, for Syria. They just said, well, we're going to stay out of it. And of course, that meant that the other Syrians of various groups had to shed their blood. Their children had to die on the battlefield defending their country against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And meanwhile, the Kurds just sat back and said, hey, look, this is a sweet deal for us. We don't fight with anybody. And that worked very well until ISIS attacked them. And then they had a tremendous battle in a city that they control. It's almost entirely Kurdish. It's a place called Kobani. They fought for 4 months defending against a siege by ISIS. And ISIS was aided across the border by the Turks. The Turks hate Kurds. Kurds have always been problematic for Turkey, and Turkey can be a very savage place when they are against enemies, particularly people who don't follow their breed of Islam. And so while Turkey was officially neutral, behind the scenes, they were very active in helping ISIS in its battle against the Kurds. Now, the Kurds they fought very valiantly. They fought very effectively. And one of the things they did that was very good from a public relations standpoint is that perhaps to a greater extent than any other group of people that I know, they have used women as frontline fighters, at least in numbers that make the women a credible element of the force. And they had certain women who fought very heroically. There was a woman, and I recall a very terrible picture of her after she was beheaded by ISIS. But she had fought with tremendous heroism, stopped ISIS attacks several times, and eventually she was captured and beheaded. But anyway, it sort of galvanized American public opinion, and it allowed the CIA to orchestrate this notion of the Kurdish homeland and how they deserve that. In any event, so the United States, what happened is around 2018, Syria, in alliance with some others, Iran had helped them a great deal. Russia had helped. Hezbollah had come across the border and they had helped. But the principal force fighting was the Syrian army itself. And they broke the back of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and they began rolling them back faster and faster. And finally, it looked as though the Syrian army was going to recapture all of the country and eliminate the terrorist threat. But at that point, the United States intervened. We began to build up forces in northern Syria, and we started using very heavy air power to block the Syrian army from impinging on the areas held by ISIS. So we weren't exactly in an alliance with ISIS, but what we were doing was very beneficial to them, and we were trying to divert the Syrian army. There was sort of a rush from the west to the east up in the northern part, and the Syrian army was rushing to try to get control of the lands that bordered Iraq, and we managed to outrace them, and just through the use of enormous air power. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to carve out an enclave, and it's a very large segment of Syria. And we wanted it because we wanted to capture the breadbasket of Syria. They have very, very rich lands for the production of wheat, and that wheat is what feeds the entire nation. We wanted to capture that wheat and impose starvation on the rest of the country. And we did that very successfully. In the north, we were able to capture all of the wheat, the entire breadbasket, and also the great majority of the oil that Syria used to. They're not a big oil producer, but they produced enough to where they got foreign exchange and they could get medications and things like that they needed. We had also blocked Syria's access to cancer medications and just sort of ordinary things that you would need to treat any kind of disease. So we imposed this enormously cruel blockade on Syria, and so in any event, we used the Kurds. We call it the SDF, the Syrian Defense Forces, and we organized the Kurds, where the Kurds were in charge of this SDF defense force, and we brought in some of the Arabs so that the Arabs would be the troops, but the Kurds would be in charge. And the Arabs who joined, they needed the money and there was nowhere to make money, so they joined the SDF under the Kurds, but they hated the Kurds, and so there's tremendous ethnic tension within this group. But as long as the U.S. was there, then the Kurds could rule through the SDF.
Yeah. I want to go ahead and just place a map up so people can kind of see. In the yellow, I guess, is most important information, is just that is the Kurdish SDF control. the U.S. with the U.S. and alliance of the SDF. And then you have the red. This is actually in 2024. So this is, al-Jawani's army. And it just shows you the control. And I also think it's very interesting. You see the different factions of how many states are invested in kind of keeping Syria torn apart. You have the Golan Heights at the southern tip, the blue part. You have the Kurdish, where the U.S. was. Now we've switched and we're on Jawani's side, which is really putting the SDF people in a sticky spot. But I think another important thing to note is the amount of prisons that are in the north that are housing Daesh, ISIS, the radical extremists, that through this conflict, it serves to be problematic, and there might be another resurgence of terrorist activities from these extremists, not only in Syria but in Iraq. The article that kind of goes into this event at the very end talks about how the Iraqi government is now going to house the ISIS members from this one particular prison. What are your thoughts on that? I find it very problematic in the sense that it's just going to cause this never-ending conflict, especially with these radical extremists. Through in the detentions, I think there's over 40,000 all over the north, and I think 18,000 of them are foreign nationals from over 60 countries that the countries do not want them back. Because of their ideology is very extreme. And it's said that these prisons were not meant to house people for years. These people have been in there for years. And that there is essentially ISIS is thriving in these prisons through this hierarchical system. So what are your thoughts on that? I think I can play a video shortly going into the events of this particular prison break that I think over 100 Daesh were, they fled. Ultimately, I think the American government was able to capture them, and they are now being transferred to a top security prison in Iraq. But I just want to get some of your thoughts on.
Well, it's very interesting. The United States played a very, very shadowy role in the emergence of ISIS, and we could do a whole show on that. But I'll just say that ISIS exploded out of Iraq and then into Syria. And at one point, I think they held about 30% of Syria and 40% of Iraq. And they formed the ISIS Caliphate. And the Caliphate is sort of at the end times in Islam than the original 7th century Islam, the very, very brutal fundamentalist form would emerge. And so this was what they believed was happening. Now, it was very interesting that within Syria, the capital of the caliphate was in Raqqa, out in the desert. We knew exactly where it was. The United States led this coalition. It was called an anti-ISIS coalition, and it had, I don't know what, probably 20 different countries with jet airplanes and all of this stuff. And oddly enough, for 4 years, we never attacked the capital of ISIS. We'd go out and we'd have some little, to do over here in the desert or whatever. But the capital was there, thriving with, tens of thousands of fighters there. Well, at one point we finally decided, okay, we gotta move on from this, because it had horrified the American people when they were seeing what was going on with all the beheadings, crucifixions. They were doing crucifixion, and so one day we just attacked Raqqa, And I mean, we just went in there. We attacked their capital in Iraq, in Mosul. And I mean, we just wiped them out. And the next thing, after a couple of weeks of the bombing, ISIS fled in terror. And the roads leading out of Raqqa, just for miles and miles and miles, there were just lines of cars and trucks and things, everybody fleeing. Now, at that point, and this is in a desert, and very easily, any country that was serious about eliminating this terror threat would have gone and just strafed and bombed and killed everybody who was fleeing. That would have been sort of a natural way to do it. But we took a very mysterious approach. We didn't kill the people. We didn't kill these people who had done the beheadings and the crucifixions, the immolations, burning children alive and things like that. Instead, we took them all into custody. We took them into custody. We took their wives, their children. Everybody's going to be fine in these resettlement camps, and we'll put the Kurds in charge to keep them in. It was very clear that we had future plans for ISIS. The United States has a long history of employing terrorist armies on the ground. We did it against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. We had an army of 300,000 terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists, that the CIA orchestrated and used against the Soviet Union successfully. We eventually pushed the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan using terrorist armies. And I'm not sure that we knew precisely how we were going to use ISIS, but I think the two things we had in mind, number one, was to use them against Iran. We would unleash terror armies into Iran. Number two, we were starting to think about attacking China. And part of our reason for being in Afghanistan is that there is a tiny sliver of land that connects Afghanistan to China in the area that is occupied by the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are a Turkic, Islamic, very fundamentalist population. They're Chinese, but their real loyalty is to Turkey. And they appear, from time to time, have had very violent uprisings against the Chinese people.
And it's important to note, during the fall of the Assad government, that you had a significant amount of the Uyghur militants popping up to facilitate the overthrow, which I found very interesting. Or just transported there to make sure the job was done, kind of thing.
Yeah, we had worked with Turkey, CIA, the whole group, to funnel Uyghur militants out of China, through Turkey, into Syria, and the purpose was to train them in modern warfare. And so there's about a brigade, and they very, very systematically cycled them in and cycled them out, because they wanted to train as many Uyghurs as they could, and convey this information into this area of China, so that when the time came, we could create an Islamic terrorist uprising against the Chinese people. So this is what's going on. This is the background, and what you can see now is just been announced that we have assembled another big armada to attack Iran. President Trump says he doesn't know what's going to happen, whether something will happen or something won't happen. I think it looks to me like we're going to attack Iran again. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's not just a coincidence that all of a sudden, here's all this movement involving the Kurds. Here's all this movement of ISIS people, and we've arranged to have some of ISIS moved over into Iraq so that they'll be closer to Iran, because the Iraq borders on Iran. So if you move from Syria to Iraq, then the next place is Iran. Mm-hmm. So moving ISIS forces, and we're moving out of Syria into Iraq, closer to Iran. And I think it is highly likely that, now this is my intelligence assessment, I've been pretty good. I mean, I probably have as good a grasp on Syria as anybody who has commented on it throughout the many years of war there. And so I sense that what's going on is, the fact that we're cozying up to Al Qaeda and that kind of thing, trying to lend some credibility to them. And here's a statement from U.S. envoy Tom Barrack. He's our envoy in Syria, and he says SDF's role as Syria's primary anti-ISIS force has largely expired. Says the new government is both willing and positioned to take over security responsibilities. He says the U.S. isn't interested in prolonging a separate SDF role. SDF is the Kurdish military force. And so after hyping up to the American people, we gotta have a Kurdish homeland. Mm-hmm. Now it's just evolved. We've used them. We've gotten what we wanted from them. Now, if they all get slaughtered by this al-Jilani fellow and Al-Qaeda, who cares? Right? Foreign policy is a dirty, dirty business. If most of us come from a moral foundation. People on the left, even, people on the right. Typically, ordinary people believe things are right and things are wrong. But in foreign policy, there's very little of right and wrong. And it is mostly, how do you manipulate the people to achieve your goal? Mm-hmm. And the Kurds were very useful for a while. They created this sense of inspiration, their courage fighting against ISIS. And
yeah, I would add that it also kind of exploits the, which I don't think it's a bad thing, the kind of like the American idea of like self-determination. There deserves, someone who wants this, a country, like they should have that. I feel like that's very easily exploited, given, the Kurdish minority. And oftentimes they're used frequently. And now that they've kind of gotten really put in a sticky situation, I do fear for them, and in the sense that, you do have al-Jawani's government that is now in conflict with them. And I know that kind of stems from an agreement that came from March of 2025, when initially the al-Jawani's government said that they would integrate SDF. And then there was just, I guess, a breakdown in talks recently. I guess they didn't really want to follow through with integrating them into their military. And that's kind of where you see this conflict arising from. Very, very interesting. I know that there's a statement that Jawani put out, and he reminds me so much of Zelensky, where he's like just this, I don't know, Hollywood casted character that's put into this role, and now he's like this, reputable statesman. It's ridiculous. But I want to play this statement because it's meant for Western ears. So I just want
to centralize power. He's also seeking to reassure the Kurds that their culture will be respected.
I'm honored to issue a special decree for our Kurdish people that guarantees their rights and certain aspects of their distinctiveness within the text of the law. I urge everyone who was forcibly displaced from their land to return safely and securely without any condition or restriction other than laying down arms.
So this is the same regime that has been slaughtering the Alawite community. So you said something about the Druze as well. So I would take it with a grain of salt if they're really going to kind of respect the minority of the Kurdish people. And I also kind of want to show this. Let me see if I can just skip to. There was protest in Raqqa.
Aren't so sure. These Kurdish protests.
Peace again. I tell the world just to wait 2 years for us and see how successful we will be.
But others aren't so sure. These Kurdish protesters in Aleppo accuse the government of atrocities. The army took control last week. Several people were killed in the fighting. They fear the government will not respect the rights of minorities.
If they truly love the Kurds, and if they sincerely say that the Kurds are an official and fundamental component of Syria, then the rights of the Kurdish people must be recognized in the constitution.
Fighting broke out last week when negotiations broke down on integrating the SDF into the Syrian army. Since then, the group has been pushed out of Aleppo and withdrawn east of the Euphrates. The fighting is now happening close to the city of Raqqa, which was hard won during the fight against ISIL.
Now let's see if I can pull it up, where they were actually using his face that the State Department used for, I don't know if you see it right there, the, stop this terrorist, that picture. I found that very funny because they're not.
It's a great picture. That was, that wasn't put out by some foreign press. That was, what was it, the State Department or the FBI? Mm-hmm. Advertising the $10 million bounty for this guy. And when you look in his face, imagine if you're looking at Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin signing some very nice, pleasant document. And the fact that somebody dresses up and puts on a nice suit does not make them nice people. This is a guy who literally oversaw the beheadings of tens of thousands of people, not some quirky thing that happened with some guys that got out of control. Something that was the doctrine of Al-Qaeda, which was you behead the people you conquer. And many POWs, there were incidents where it would be several hundred Syrian soldiers who had been captured after a long siege. And then they would strip them to their underpants and they would run them madly through the desert until they just were falling from exhaustion. And then they would line them up and they would chop off their heads. So here's 300 of them. And you can imagine you're forced to kneel down there. And people are being beheaded on one side of the line, and you could hear their heads dropping off, and they get closer and they get closer and they get closer, and you know that you're coming up next. And I watched this being done. It used to be on videos, and then finally, I think the CIA said, "Wow, we got to get this under control. People need to be told what to think. We can't have all of this information out there that's actually showing what these people are doing." And then it all stopped, and it became forbidden. Oh, you can't show terrible things. But as long as it was used as a terror weapon, and the CIA wanted it, you could see anything. So, this fellow who is supposed to be such a dandy individual, signing proclamations about how he's going to do all these things for the Kurds, is a guy who has ordered people beheaded hundreds and hundreds of times. He has set in place an environment where literally hundreds of thousands of Syrian women were raped by his troops. And not as quirks of war where you have some sloppy guys who are out there who do something they shouldn't do, but something that was authorized. It was religious doctrine. You could rape little children, little girls, and they drew people from all over the world. You were mentioning people coming from 100 different countries.
Yeah, 60 to be exact, which was absurd to me. But I think the most crazier tidbit in that is that, like, a lot of them don't want to be repatriated, or in their countries will not allow them back in. So where do they go?
Yeah, well, they go to Iran. I think that's the immediate plan. Mm-hmm. And those people, the recruiting for ISIS and for Al Qaeda is very similar. The way they recruited, it was understood by all of these people. You go and you fight with ISIS or with Al Qaeda under al-Jilani, and you will own any women that you capture. And I'm not talking about soldiers. I'm talking about just some women who are living in a house raising their children. If you capture them, you own them. If you capture their little girls, you own them. You can sell them. You can buy and sell. You can buy these women and these little girls from other jihadists. And there was one incident, at least. There may have been others, but I recall seeing there was someone who secretly photographed the transactions taking place with the purchase of the women and the little girls. And there was a price list, and what was kind of sickening about the price list is that the younger the woman was, the higher the price, and the younger the little girls were, the higher the price. The most expensive of all of the females who were bought and sold were little girls who were less than 10 years old. Those were the most expensive to purchase. And if you purchased them, you owned them. And I recall one, I think he was probably with Al Qaeda, so it's sort of the forces of al-Jilani. But there was a commander who drove an American Humvee into battle. And what he would do when he would go into battle, he owned a girl who was a 12 or 13-year-old girl. He would strip her naked, and he would tie her across his windshield so that as he roared into battle, he knew the Syrian army they were very decent people. They were very moral. and they just wouldn't shoot and kill a child. And so this guy he figured it out. These guys are suckers. They'll hold off on firing because they don't want to kill this little girl. And I'll go roaring through, and I can come in with my guns blazing.
Yeah,
it's the kind of people that are represented by al-Jilani. It's hard for Americans to conceive of it because it's all very quickly whitewashed to where we said nothing to see here, nothing to see. Just imagine that everything is fine.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just important to note that there's going to be much more chaos when this kind of confrontation between the Syrian army now and the SDF. I think we want to do closing statements.
Yes, I think I would just say, we'll reconvene next week and we'll find out, are we in another war? I'm not sure. Has there been a week where we haven't attacked somebody? I don't know. It's like,
no, it's very disheartening. I hoped for better, and it seems like
it's been very disappointing. There was New York Times had a poll, and it showed that the GOP voters feel like there's a lack of clear focus on domestic issues.
Mm-hmm.
And there are enormous domestic challenges that we face.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is a bit off topic, and I know we're doing concluding statements, but the peace board and talking about developing Gaza, I just find that it's insulting because none of the Palestinians are being considered, but it's also insulting in the sense that where's the drive to have infrastructure projects in America? There's not,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what Americans truly want. They want to have, things like high-speed rail, like China has, and so they can, commute to work easily. There's so many different things that you could do productively within our own nation that we're truly neglecting both sides of the aisle. And one thing that I found highly insulting was the Board of Peace, and them talking about the building up, Gaza to be this new techno city, and it's going to be so great. And we're not having those conversations about making any of our cities great. I mean, the state of New York it's very bad, and so it just kind of made me think of that one.
I mean, that's a great point, and really the darker part of it is that this idea, it's going to be built into this glorious, wonderful place. Mm-hmm. The underlying assumption is that at that point, Israel will have exterminated the population of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
They're not talking about, well, we're going to have these wonderful places and all of the people of Gaza will sing Hosanna. Look, we're all rich. We've all, we can all be baristas for the tourists, or we can,
mm-hmm.
can all open a little hot dog stand. No, the presumption is that all of them are dead. That every man, every woman, every child in Gaza is dead. That's the presumption. Mm-hmm. And then you go ahead and you start off fresh. You start off new.
Yeah.
So it's, if it works as the Israelis have it planned, it will be perhaps the most thorough ethnic cleansing that we've had since, I don't know, we had the Haitian genocide in our hemisphere, but there have been times, I'm sure, where there have been complete annihilations of people. But But the irony is that for the people of Israel who always are talking about the Holocaust and so forth, by what measure was the Holocaust worse than what they're doing in Gaza? I don't know.
I mean, just the air superiority, their ability to, what they're doing right now is blocking mobile homes. So you have children who are freezing to death at night.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just barbaric, and it's unacceptable. And I think it's imperative on us to not let people forget, because I think that is kind of what they're hoping for, is through the chaos of the world that we'll find a new cause to link onto. But I think with what they've done in Gaza it's reprehensible, and they're going to do it in the West Bank as well. They've already started. But I know that we kind of had a little side tangent on that, and it's always a pleasure talking to you, Senator. But I just want to encourage everybody to tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you again, Senator, for your expertise.
Thank you, Morgan.